It's October 21st, 2009, and a 9-year-old girl in St. Martins, Missouri goes out to play with her friend and never comes back home. And unfortunately, this isn't a unique occurrence in true crime. I mean, young kids, they go missing all the time. But when the FBI finally figures out what happens to her, the truth would shock the American public to its core. Now, this case does have sensitive details involving children and mention of self-harm. So if these are triggering topics for you guys, just make sure you're taking care of yourselves as always. So before we start, I want to quickly talk about the emo subculture. And you guys probably know what emo is. I mean, it's still a thing today, obviously, in the big 2026. But in 2009, that was really when emo was at its peak. And if you were too young to remember, let me paint an image for you. Millions of kids across America, around the whole world, rocking this super heavy eyeliner, side fringe over one eye type look, shopping at Hot Topic. And emos were kind of like these angsty, depressed teenagers, right? They basically made their bleak emotions their entire personal aesthetic. And one of these teenagers living in the United States was 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. She was living with her grandparents, Karen and Gary Brooke, in St. Martins, Missouri. Alyssa did have a really rough life in a lot of ways, especially at the beginning of her childhood, and how she looked and acted like this really hardcore emo vibe kind of portrayed the fact that she went through a bunch of really traumatic things when she was younger. And she pretty much fit the emo image to a T. She had that side fringe, heavy smudge black eyeliner look with very morbid interests as well. And Alyssa, like many other teenagers at this time, spent a lot of her time on MySpace. This was Facebook before Facebook, right? And you can list hobbies on there, and she listed things like killing people and cutting as her hobbies, which is very, very morbid. You can see just how much she was leaning into this emo aesthetic. And she would also post photos of her slashed wrists and her mouth covered in really hot red lipstick that was smudged and it kind of looked like blood. And her profile tagline read, "I'm pretty much a psycho, but I'm pretty fun to talk to." And people probably saw her profile and was like, "Oh yeah, this is just another one of those edgy emo teens. That's just how teenagers are." Because at the time, you saw so many of this. So it wasn't exactly concerning when people saw these types of things, even though it is admittedly a little bit strange. All of this edgy bios, dark humor, jokes about death and destruction. I mean, that was literally the language of the entire emo subculture. But the difference now is that now we know that for Alyssa, this wasn't just an aesthetic. This was something way, way deeper. So Alyssa Bustamante was born on January 28th, 1994, and she was raised by teenage parents. They had her when they were very young, but they had a very unstable life. She had a really, neglectful childhood. Like her mother, Michelle Bustamante, struggled with alcohol and substance abuse, and her dad, Cesar Bustamante, got incarcerated for assault. So literally before the age of 10 years old, she watched both of her parents go to jail. So at some point, Alyssa and her three siblings, they ended up being in the care of their grandparents, Gary and Karen Brooke. Now, I will note here that I will be referring to Alyssa and the household she lives in as the Brooke household because that's the last name of her grandparents. So in 2007, at just 13 years old, Alyssa attempted suicide by overdosing on painkillers. She was very, very depressed. Her mental health was just pretty much in the dumps, and she had to be put on antidepressants, specifically Prozac, and she was pretty much regularly self-harming. And all of these things were very obvious in how she would act, how she would dress, and the things that she would post online. She had even posted this one photo of the word hate carved into her arm, which is very, very disturbing. So her entire digital footprint didn't hide any of the things that was going on inside of her head. And at one point, a YouTube video surfaced showing Alyssa encouraging her younger twin brother to grab an electric fence meant for livestock. The ones that literally shock you and it hurts. it hurts when you touch these things. And you can literally hear her laughing in the back of the video as they're like getting shocked as if it's like a little fun game. And then she captioned this video, "This is where it gets good. We get to see my brother get hurt." And offline, she shared very similar thoughts. She had a lot of these really dark feelings, and she would put all of this into her journals, which we will go into later. But the question is, right? How much warning was there really? And I mean, honestly, there was quite a lot. Hindsight is always 2020. This wasn't some like invisible struggle, right? You can see a lot of these things that she's posting online. She's broadcasting her darkest thoughts, like carving them into her own skin. She was clearly a really deeply troubled teenager in crisis. And yet, at the time, nobody stepped in. There was no intervention for Alyssa. Alyssa's grandparents, they could obviously see that she was struggling and she was really going through stuff, but they didn't know how deep her struggle was. So, yeah, to answer the question, warning signs were there. But were the people around her truly equipped to understand what those warning signs were actually pointing towards? Well, that's a much harder question to answer. So, in St. Martin's, Missouri, where Alyssa lived, it's a very small, quiet community just outside Jefferson City. It's a type of neighborhood where kids play outside because it's super safe. They don't really need parental supervision. Like, front doors are left unlocked because of how safe it is. And, neighbors knew each other by name. So, it's like a really close, tight knit community. And living in that neighborhood was also a little 9-year-old girl named Elizabeth Olten. And she was called Lizzie by the people who loved her. She was in 4th grade. She loved dogs, baking cookies, and Hannah Montana, like typical 9-year-old girl stuff. And she was very social, very, very active. Like she was constantly running around the neighborhood looking for other people, well, more specifically, other kids to play with. And one of her closest friends also lived in the neighborhood, a little girl called Emma. They were around the same age, and she lived just around 4 houses down from Lizzie. It's Wednesday, October 21st, 2009, and Lizzie is just playing outside, doing what she always did, just enjoying herself. And then her friend Emma came over to the front door, and Lizzie's mom, Patricia, also known as Patty, and I'll be referring to as Patty throughout this case, answers the door, and Emma's like, "Hey, I want to play with Lizzie. Is that possible?" And Patty's like, "Yeah, you guys can go out and play. On one condition though, make sure Lizzie is home by 6 p.m., which, seems pretty fair to me. So the two girls head outside and they play together for around an hour. I mean, it's literally just 2 kids in a really quiet neighborhood on a really normal, ordinary Wednesday evening. No one would think much of it, right? And then at some point, as these 2 young girls are playing, Alyssa appears. And Alyssa is actually Emma's older sister, who's 15 years old at this time, right? So she comes over and she tells Emma to leave. She's like, "Go home, Emma." And she has that kind of older sister look in her eyes that makes Emma scared to defy her and say no. But of course, Emma doesn't really want to leave. I mean, she's playing with her friend and having a good time. So she kind of is pouting, is like, "Fine, I'll go." So she gets up and leaves, even though she didn't really want to. And now it's just Lizzie and Alyssa. But that's also pretty normal, right? Because these are still 2 kids playing together. And Lizzie knew Alyssa, right? Lizzie and Emma were good friends. Alyssa was Emma's older sister. They only lived 4 houses apart. So to anyone looking at this situation, there wasn't anything unordinary about this. Now, Alyssa, as her and Lizzie are kind of just wandering around, she's like, "Hey, let's walk down this street to a specific place. Just follow me." And Lizzie's like, "Okay." So the 2 of them are walking down this neighborhood and they slowly start going further and further away from their homes, where soon it becomes pretty much out of sight. And Lizzie's kind of trailing behind Alyssa. She's just kind of following her. She doesn't really know where she's going until they kind of meet the entrance of this really big wooded area. And to Lizzie, she's just kind of excited that an older kid wanted to hang out with her. She wasn't really thinking or questioning where are we going? What are we doing? She's just there quiet, following and listening. I mean, a 9-year-old is probably pretty excited that a 15-year-old girl wants to hang out with her, right? You don't really question it. You just follow. So Lizzie followed and they made their way into the woods. Now, Patty is at home, looking at the clock, and she's realized it's 6 p.m. now and Lizzie hasn't returned home yet. And usually Lizzie returns home pretty much on time or a little early. So Patty is just okay, I'm going to go over to the house. She's in trouble. Patty slowly makes her way up the driveway and then she knocks on the front door. And Karen, the grandmother of Alyssa and Emma, answers the door. And Patty's like, hey, like, is Lizzie around? Like, she hasn't come home yet. And the grandmother responds, like, wait, what? No, Lizzie never came over. And Patty's like, huh? What do you mean? Like, Emma came over to ask Lizzie to hang out. And so I thought she was here. And Karen's like, no, they were never here. So Patty's like, well, if she never came over, then where is she? And call it mother's intuition. Patty just had this immediate like gut feeling that something was really, really wrong. Because this has never happened before, where she had gone over to someone's house and they're like, oh, actually, Lizzie's not here. No, no, no. She always knows where Lizzie is, and Lizzie always comes home on time. So Patty immediately calls the police. And in just 1 hour, this situation is escalating like very, very quick. The police are involved. And not just the police, by the way, literally everyone in the community is involved. Like 1/3 of the community volunteered to look for Lizzie. So in the span of like less than 2 hours, it was just Patty waiting for Lizzie to come home, realizing she's not at the Brooks' house and calling the police. And now everyone is in the neighborhood searching for her. There was even dogs from Missouri State Highway Patrol Canine Unit looking for her, sniffing for her, helicopters like hovering around the trees. I mean, it was a very intense response from the community, but it just goes to show how everyone was feeling the weight of a missing child and what that could possibly mean. Because everyone knows that the first couple hours of a missing child is the most vital in order to find them alive. Now, among those who were searching for Lizzie was also Alyssa. She was out there with everybody else, searching through the entire neighborhood. I mean, she even posted a message on her social media saying, this is going to be a long, hard search. Keep your fingers crossed. Now, they searched for hours for Lizzie. But even then, there was still no sign of her. At this point, it had been a full 24 hours since anyone had last seen Lizzie or last heard from her. There is no sign of her. No one can find her. Now, this is kind of terrible to say, but people were hoping that she kind of got injured in the woods and was just like waiting to be found. But it's better to think that than the worst case scenario, right? Because it's been 24 hours, like a full day since anyone has seen her. And everyone was really starting to worry that maybe something like really, really bad happened to her, like a kidnapping or something worse. So at this point, the FBI was called in to take lead of the investigation. Now, the investigation started with basically tracing Lizzie's last known location. So they know for a fact that she was headed over to the Brooks' home, right? Because Emma literally came over and asked Patty if Lizzie could come and play with her. So the investigators interview Emma and they question her. And Emma told investigators that, yeah, they had been outside playing, hence why the grandparents never saw Lizzie come over and they didn't know she was even there because they played outside. And then soon after that, they like parted ways. And then Emma said that she had tripped and like fell into a bush at some point and was like calling out for her sister, Alyssa. And this is when the investigators stopped and they go, wait. What do you mean you called out for your sister? Like that felt a little bit random in this whole story. And then Emma was like, oh, it's because Alyssa was there too. And when Emma left and parted ways with them, Alyssa had walked off with Lizzie. Now, I know it doesn't really make sense what I'm saying. Like it sounds a little bit confusing, but we have to keep in mind like Emma's like a really young girl, like she's a child. So the story she was telling to investigators was probably like a little bit all over the place, but that was pretty much the gist of what she had said. So soon after that, Alyssa was then brought in for questioning, and her demeanor was something that kind of immediately stood out to investigators because she was very calm, almost like unnervingly normal. And that's not necessarily like a weird thing, but considering the fact that there's a missing child and this is a child that she also knows and is friends with, you would think that she'd be like a little bit stressed about it, like anxious, like everybody else in the community. She told investigators that the night before she was actually at a church for a dance and she didn't really know what was going on until someone told her like, hey, Lizzie's missing. And then she helped out with the search. And throughout her whole explanation of this, she doesn't seem distressed. There's just like no urgency there. Like it was just kind of an odd vibe that the investigators took note of. Now, of course, the investigators also spoke to the grandparents and I guess they just had like normal standard questions for them about what happened the day before. But the grandparents told investigators something really interesting, something that they kept note of. They told them that Alyssa liked to spend a lot of time in the woods. And Alyssa would often go into these woods, not just to like go on a walk, but she would also spend a lot of time like digging there. Apparently, that was something that she liked to do. Now, after they had questioned everybody, this is when they also tried to track Lizzie's cell phone. So they actually, contacted her cell phone provider and requested an emergency ping on her phone. Now, yeah, it is kind of weird that a 9-year-old has a phone, but when I think about it, when I was around that age, I actually had a flip phone. So I could contact my parents if anything were to happen, because I usually would walk to school by myself. So I guess it's not that weird. And considering the circumstance, like it's actually a really good thing that she had a phone. Now, when they looked at where the location was pinging from, it was a signal from like deep in the wooded area nearby. So now, right, with Emma's interview and knowing that Alyssa was with Lizzie, plus the cell phone location, this is when police begin zeroing in on Alyssa, right? She's kind of like the primary suspect as of right now, but they keep that very low key. They don't bring her in just yet. Now, they have teams that go into the woods where they found like the ping, and they see like a bunch of holes that were clearly dug out by someone, not by an animal, right? And this was also done recently. They can tell based on like how fresh the dirt was. So they went and questioned Alyssa again because they kind of knew she liked to dig holes because the grandparents had told them that. And when they confronted Alyssa and was like, hey, do you like to dig holes? Like, why did you do that? She was like, oh yeah, like I just like to dig holes because I like to, bury dead animals that I would come across, like especially cats, because, I want to pay my respects to them. Now, admittedly, this is still a little bit of a weird thing to do. And, investigators weren't really buying it. Like that is incredibly suspicious considering everything that is going on. So very quickly, they get a search warrant for the Brooks residence and they go into her bedroom, into Alyssa's bedroom. And as soon as they enter, they see walls covered in like dark Gothic writing with like very morbid things, and not just in pen, but also in her own blood. And everything was about like her own emotional turmoil and like how much she hated life. And as they kept looking around, right, like believe it or not, her writing in her own blood on the walls wasn't even the most creepy, messed up part about all of this. As they were looking around, they found her diary. And as they went through it, they saw that she had written down very disturbing fantasies, like violent thoughts and scenarios, like setting a house on fire with everybody trapped inside and hearing their screams. She even wrote, if I don't talk about it, I bottle it up, and when I explode, someone's going to die. So obviously this is very concerning. They keep going through the journal and then they get to the last page and they can see like a huge chunk of a paragraph had been like scribbled out. So the FBI was able to use backlighting and other forensic methods to make out what she had written. And this is what they see. I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them, and now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now, lol. Yeah, she fully wrote down how she killed someone and enjoyed the killing. And the whole thing is obviously super disturbing, but for me, what she does after all of this is somehow worse. Now, after finding the diary, they did bring Alyssa in for questioning, and her grandmother did accompany her as Alyssa was a minor. So they enter into this interrogation room, and Alyssa's sitting in the corner, and right across from her is David Rice, who conducted the interview, and then she has another FBI agent on her side, the one who found the journal. So they're very close to her. Like, she has no personal space whatsoever, and they're locked in, paying attention to every single word that comes out of her mouth. Now, there is interrogation footage, and I watched all of it. And Alyssa's behavior for most of the interrogation, she appears very, very normal. Like, she answers her questions very articulately. She knows what she's saying. She's not stuttering. Like, she even giggled and laughed at certain times, like kind of showing how she's like very lighthearted about all of this. But I'm going to specifically talk about some of the moments from this interrogation footage. So the officer looks at Alyssa and he asks, when we find out who did something to Lizzie, what do you think should happen to them? I mean, they should get convicted because of all the trouble they caused. And then he says, Did you do anything to Elizabeth? Did you kill her? Do you know where she is? And Alyssa has these like fast, rapid replies. No, no, no. Now, at some point, they keep talking, and then the grandmother actually ends up telling the room that the officers took some of the items from the search. And one of those items that they had taken was actually Alyssa's diary. Now, the investigator then, looks over to the grandma and is like, have you gone through her diary? And she's like, yeah, I've looked at some of it. Yes. And then she said, like, she never snooped. She only looked at it when it was like left open. And you can kind of see Alyssa's face when all of that information was revealed to her. It wasn't like a shock, but it was sort of an acknowledgement that it had been read. And she didn't like that. It made her feel angry, like it was her personal thoughts. But because her grandmother announced this to the entire room, it's now made known to Alyssa that the investigators have her diary. And the investigator even tells Alyssa, we've read your diary. We've read your last entry. And at this point, Alyssa's still keeping like calm and cool, like she's not freaking out or anything. And the investigator just looks at her and says, where is Lizzie? Tell us the truth. If this was your little sister, wouldn't you want to know what happened to her? And he keeps pressing her. Like he can tell that she's reaching a breaking point now that she knows they've read her diary. And he's like, we just want to know the truth. We have to give this family closure. If this was your little sister, wouldn't you want closure too? Was this something that was planned or was this an accident? And this is when Alyssa starts to admit it was an accident. And she suddenly just like puts her head into her hands and she's just like sobbing, like bawling her eyes out. And throughout all of this, like while she's crying very aggressively, the investigator is still asking her questions because now they're like getting a confession out of her, right? But they still need more. They need to know where Lizzie's body is. And as Alyssa is trying to explain like what happened that day, she's like sniffling throughout telling the story. But she tells the investigator that they were in the woods, her and Lizzie. They were messing around, playing, and then Lizzie died. She didn't know what to do. And she's crying hard throughout all of this, right? She's like breathing hard between words. And throughout this whole time, she's explaining what happened on that day. The room is very quiet. The investigator doesn't stop or say anything. And Alyssa says, after she just died, I burned her body because I didn't want to get charged. And the investigator gets straight to the point, where at? Where is her body? And Alyssa's like, not too far back in the forest. And then she goes on to say that how Lizzie died was because she had fallen over and hit her head. But the investigator was obviously not buying her BS because he goes on to say, was her throat cut? And Alyssa was like, yeah. And I think this was the first moment, like throughout the whole interrogation, where now it's like said out loud, explicitly, very clearly, that she did something to Lizzie. Because even earlier when she admitted to it, she was like, oh, but she died suddenly. She fell and hit her head. But now this was the moment she was like, yeah, her throat was cut. And her grandmother, oh my God, her reaction, she was in complete shock at hearing this. You can literally hear her go like, oh my God, as she puts her hand over her chest because she's in just like such disbelief at what she's hearing. Obviously, the grandmother leaves the room along with the other FBI agent who ushers her out. So it's just the investigator and Alyssa in the room. And the investigator just looks at Alyssa and says,
they knew you were going to kill her. And then you cut her throat. Is that what happened? Yes. What did you use to cut her throat with?
My kitchen knife.
Okay. Where's that kitchen knife now?
In the sink.
In the sink of your house?
I believe so.
Okay. Did you stab her?
Afterward.
Stab her body or where?
Yes.
Okay. How many times did you stab her?
Two.
Two.
I think.
So on Friday, October 23rd, just 2 days after Lizzie disappeared, her body was found deep in the woods, exactly where Alyssa said it would be. Now, this is all based on Alyssa's full confession from that interrogation, right? As well as the evidence that they had gathered. So they were able to see the full picture of things. Alyssa had been planning the murder for at least a week. She had gone into the woods, dug the grave in advance, and then went to school and just like acted very normal throughout that whole week, like going through her own routine, which to me is like one of the craziest parts about all of this. It's just like how normal she was and how normal she acted after killing a young girl. And basically what had actually happened was once Lizzie and her were alone in those woods, Alyssa full on attacks her. And it doesn't take a lot of effort from her end because she's so much bigger than Lizzie. She's just like a little girl. And she continues to strangle her and then slit her throat and stabbed her 8 times in the chest. And then she took her body and placed it into the small grave that she had dug beforehand, that she had already prepared, and then covered it with a bunch of dirt. It was like really poorly done though. It was like very obvious that like the ground had been manipulated. Now, obviously, one of the most shocking things about this case was their age, because Alyssa was only 15 years old and Lizzie was only 9 years old at the time. So the fact that this all happened as well, just like a couple meters away from where they both lived in like a really quiet, safe neighborhood where everyone knew each other, this case like really blew up at the time and it shocked a lot of people. And the fact as well, like I think one of the most depressing facts about this case was that Lizzie wasn't chosen for any particular reason either. There was no grudge between them, no conflict, like nothing bad ever happened between them. This was just because she was an easy target. That's why Alyssa chose Lizzie, that poor 9-year-old girl. So like I had mentioned before, one of the most disturbing things about this case was just how normal Alyssa acted throughout all of this and just like how killing seemed like something she wanted to do. And it was just normal to her. Because after the murder, she went home and then she just resumed her evening. Just like that. While Patty realized Lizzie wasn't home yet, while hundreds of people were out gathering in the dark with flashlights looking for a missing 9-year-old girl, while dogs and helicopters and highway patrol were also, partaking in this huge search, Alyssa was at a church dance, laughing, dancing, completely unbothered. And it's also the fact that after that, she helped with the search. And then even wrote that online post about, keep your fingers crossed. This is going to be a long, hard search. So obviously during the search and like everything that happened after that, that's why no one really thought to look at her. And this is just the part that gets me the most out of this whole case. Like it's just so unsettling. Now with Alyssa in custody and having her full confession, the charges came down onto her like very quickly. She was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action, but because she was 15 years old, was she going to be tried as an adult or a juvenile, right? So we are aware of her history. She's 15 years old. She attempted suicide at 13. She was let down by her parents before she could even form solid memories. She was on antidepressants. All of that. Like they were very aware of her history. So she was a child who had been failed by virtually every system that was supposed to protect her. So the question people were asking at the time was, when a child has been failed by every system, commits an unthinkable act, does the justice system treat her as the perpetrator or as someone who is also in a very, very different way a victim? Now, before the case moved on to sentencing, mental health was very important to this trial. It was like the center of all of it because post-arrest, she was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, borderline personality disorder, which, neither of those things is particularly surprising. And her defense argued that the antidepressant she was on, the Prozac, she was on it for 2 years, and that contributed to her violent behavior. They even had a psychiatrist that testified and said that her prescription could have, keyword, could have amplified, her mood being very unstable as well as violent tendencies. Now, the prosecution in response said it doesn't matter. Whatever was happening in her mind, whatever the medication was doing or not doing, this is the facts of the crime. It tells a very clear story. She dug the grave days in advance, showing premeditation and preparation for the murder. She used her own sister to lure Lizzie, actually. So I never mentioned this earlier, but the reason Emma went over to Lizzie's house in the first place asking to play was because Alyssa told Emma to go and do that, which is insane. Like getting your little sister involved in all of this as well, crazy. And she wrote about the killing in her journal, like in detail, saying how it excited her. So these were very clear actions of someone who had planned, executed, and then reflected on what they had done with a level of detachment that has nothing to do with Prozac. So on January 10th, 2012, just a week before this case was going to go to trial, Alyssa actually entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. So originally she was charged with first-degree murder, but now that was completely off the table since she entered a guilty plea. And what this means is that she has like less of a harsher sentence because, as we know, first-degree murder carries a way harsher sentence. So some people said like, oh, this was a legal strategy. This is her way of like trying to get out of having a longer sentence. But her attorney was like, no, Alyssa genuinely wants to take responsibility for what she had done. Now, that's kind of up to debate. We don't actually know for sure what her intentions are. I'm going to leave that up to you guys to decide. But at sentencing, Alyssa did something that shocked everybody in the courtroom. She got up and then faced Elizabeth's family and spoke directly to them. And she said, I really am extremely very sorry for everything. I know words can never be enough, and they can never adequately describe how horribly I feel for all of this. If I could give my life to get her back, I would. I'm sorry. And in response, the room was just silent. There was like this thick tension in the air. And Patty, Lizzie's mom, she didn't give her any sort of emotional reaction or sympathy. She literally called Alyssa an evil monster on the first day of sentencing. Her eyes were just forward, locked on with like no reaction whatsoever, which honestly is pretty understandable and totally justified. I mean, she killed her daughter. So on February 8th, 2012, she was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 30 years for armed criminal action running consecutively, which means that this 30-year sentence won't even start until after the life sentence is complete. I never really understood like what's actually the purpose of all of that, but honestly, whatever, she's going to be in prison for the rest of her life. That's a good thing. And she has appealed many times over the years, but they've all been rejected. Now, Patty did pursue civil action on multiple fronts. She actually filed a wrongful death suit against Alyssa, and then she ended up settling for $5 million in 2017. Now, I'm thinking, and you might be thinking, like, how is Alyssa possibly going to pay that off? Like, you don't even earn that much money in jail. But then I realized, like, on the flip side, she can't profit from any media coverage from this case without disclosing it to Patty. So as of today, Alyssa is incarcerated. She's been in jail for 16 and a half years, and we're left with the questions that still don't have any clean answers. Were there multiple warning signs? Yes. Did the system fail her and Lizzie and many others in this case? Yes. And what do we do as a society when the person who commits an unthinkable crime is also a child who never stood a chance? Well, I don't have the answer to that, but I think the least we can do is keep asking it. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you guys have any thoughts about this case that you would like to share with me, please comment down below. Please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done already, and take care of yourselves, guys. I will see you in the next one.